Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and you're all very welcome to another live stream, and it's a pleasure to have you. So, as per usual, tech checks in the beginning. If you could just jump into the comment section and make me aware, let me know if indeed you can actually hear my voice, let me know if it all sounds good. I keep saying I'm new to this thing. This is like my fourth or fifth stream, so I'm always paranoid that there are going to be technical issues. So if you could just jump into the comments or jump into the chat, that might be a more accurate way of putting it, and just tell me if you can hear the audio and if that's all clear and sounding good. Thank you, Dylan. Dylan says, yeah, it's good. That's fantastic. Eric says, sounds good. Fantastic. Thank you. The unlucky legume. Everything sounds good here. Fantastic. I really, really appreciate that. That's really kind of you to let me know. So, hello everybody. And as I was saying before, hang on a minute now. I'm just looking here. That's weird. Sorry, so my live stream in another area is saying that it's 2 minutes behind. Maybe it is 2 minutes behind, but that wouldn't make sense given how quickly you guys just responded to that question. But look, what can you do? I'm just taking a look there at how many viewers we have at the moment. So there's a few of you guys who have hopped in, guys and girls, that is. So it's great to have you here. So I've got an interesting stream for you this evening, guys. I'm hoping we can get a few people in and get a bit of discussion going, get a bit of conversation going. Hello, Ricky. The plan this evening is to talk about miracles, which is something that comes up all the time when we as skeptics discuss the arguments for God's existence with religious people or even non religious people. Some people can be persuaded by so called miraculous occurrences, and I suppose this entire conversation rests upon how we're defining the word miracle. So let me just make this abundantly clear from the word go so that we don't run into any problems later on. I'm defining miracle as a violation of the natural law, a violation of the laws of physics or what have you. Something like that. The reason I would define it that way is because if we define a miracle as just something that's unlikely to happen, for example, well, then suddenly winning the lottery is a miracle. Of course, it's unlikely that I'm going to win the lottery. It wouldn't make it a miracle if I do. I'm just lucky. Surviving certain illnesses is unlikely, cancer being the most obvious example. It's incredibly unlikely that you're going to survive certain forms, not all forms, but certain forms, inoperable forms, stage 4, that sort of thing. And yet some people do. They go into spontaneous remission, and this is a phenomenon that's well documented in the medical field. I wouldn't call that a miracle either. That's just an unlikely event. So it's very, very important that we get our definition right here before we proceed, because otherwise we're going to be tripping over the vagaries of the word miracle. And that's the key thing. So when somebody says, oh, the house burned down, but the Bible survived, miracle. Well, is it impossible for a Bible to survive a house fire? Of course not. And so I wouldn't say that that's a miracle. There's nothing there that violates the natural laws. There's nothing there that requires any supernatural agency or the intervention of a divine overseer or agent or what have you. It's just an unlikely event, and more to the point, if you're going to sing hip hip hooray when the Bible survives the fucking fire, I mean, what about your family? What about the dog that died in the fire, or your child who died of smoke inhalation? But praise be to God that the Bible fucking survived. My volume is super low, says one person. Could you just tell me in the in the chat, guys, if the volume is super low for you? I can bring the mic closer to my mouth. It might be a case of me just not having the mic close, or perhaps you need to turn up your volume on your end. Um, yeah, I love that comment there by Bovine Joni, if I've gotten that name correct. The miracle of childbirth is contradictory. And I agree. I think that is a contradiction in terms. I don't think that makes any sense. There's nothing miraculous about childbirth. It is a perfectly explicable natural process, right? And I'm not going to give you listeners a lesson in the birds and the bees. It is past midnight, but I don't think that would be appropriate for this channel. I may start up an OnlyFans. Who the hell knows? But yeah, there's nothing miraculous about childbirth at all. So my favorite example that I go to is the story of Julian Kopka, which you may or may not be familiar with. Julian Kopka survived a plane crash. Now, there were, I'm going to forget the numbers precisely, but there were 90-something passengers on board. It might have been 93, 94 passengers on board. You can fact check me by Googling this. There were 94 passengers on board, and everybody died in the plane crash, except for Julian Kopka. She survived a plane crash, right? This is pretty, I'm tempted to use the word miraculous, because in common parlance the word miraculous just means, oh well, that was lucky, that was surprising. But in the manner that a theist wants to deploy the term, clearly it's not miraculous. It's possible to survive a plane crash, it's just spectacularly unlikely. It's unlikely. And what's even more interesting about Julian Kopka's story, not only did she survive the plane crash, she then survived like a week's long, might have even been more, an 11-day hike through the jungle. When you dive into the details, though, it starts to seem a little bit less incredible. So first of all, the manner in which she survived the jungle has a lot to do with her upbringing. She was actually raised by parents who taught her how to survive in the jungle and so on. And when she fell out of the plane, she fell out of the plane attached to her seat and landed. Now, again, this doesn't suddenly make it, oh, that makes sense. I'm not saying that this just washes it away completely. But she was, what would I say? Like, she ejected is the word I would use. She was ejected out of the cabin in her seat. And the seat cushioned part of her fall, and she landed in heavy undergrowth, which also cushioned part of her fall. But she was injured and survived. So suffice to say, this is an incredible story. I'm not taking from the incredible nature of the story, and I'm not suggesting for a second that it isn't noteworthy. Of course it is. I'm not going to try and reduce this story to an irrelevancy. I'm bringing it up precisely because it's relevant and because it's incredible. I'm just not prepared to call it a miracle. And for those, the real funny thing about this story is, and there's not much funny that could be said about 90-something people perishing in a plane crash, but the real funny thing about theists wanting to cite this as an example of a miracle is, what about the other fucking 92 people who perished? Right? Were they just not good enough? Were they just on the chopping block as far as God was concerned? Does God play favourites? What made Julian Kopka deserving of survival while the rest of them perished? Right? So when you cite this as an example of a miracle performed by God, you just open up a cavalcade of other problems. So in any case, coming full circle, the point I'm wishing to convey here is that a miracle should be defined, in my view, and I think is defined by many theists in this way, as an intervention in the natural order, where something happens that ought not be possible, and yet happens anyway. And the Bible is filled with examples like this. So, dead people coming back to life. Now, before anybody jumps into the comments and says, oh, but magic, skeptic, we do have demonstrable cases of near-death experiences. Yeah, the operative word in that sentence is near death. What we don't have are demonstrable examples of somebody being dead for a week and then climbing out of the grave. That doesn't happen, guys. We have no examples of somebody being clinically dead, provably clinically dead, and then coming out of the grave a week later, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, like a fucking zombie. That's never happened, or at least it's never been demonstrated to happen. I don't want to get into the weeds here and trying to prove a negative, proving that something hasn't happened. What I'm really saying here, although I'm being a bit clumsy with my language, is that thus far I have seen no evidence from those who believe that it has occurred. I've seen no good reason to warrant belief in the claim that people can come back from the dead. Such a thing would be an intervention in the natural order. Another example, aside from the examples of Jesus bringing people back from the dead, let alone the example of Jesus' resurrection in and of itself, what about the example of the splitting of the Red Sea? Again, there are examples like this where clearly there's an intervention in the natural order. And the Bible is filled with examples of such interventions. And that's what I'm talking about when I refer to miracles. So, do miracles happen? Do they actually occur? Is there evidence for miracles? Well, to get into this topic, to get into this conversation today, what I'm going to do is take you guys through an article that was published by a Christian website called Christianity Today. The article is entitled, Miracles Are Outlasting the Arguments Against Them. A pretty bold claim. So this article that we're going to explore is erecting a defense of miracles, and it's going so far as to suggest that the arguments against them have failed. But what's really funny about this article, and I will put it on screen momentarily, dear listener, don't worry. What's really funny about this article is that even that title is fallacious before we even get started. In my view, there is arguably a fallacy at play here. The title of the article, and I'll read it just one more time. Hell, why don't I just swap to the article right now? So you're going to see something weird on the screen for just a second. It's going to do that. And actually, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go back to here and make sure that I have the article ready to rock. So that will do. So now I will change this to here. And now you guys should be able to see the article. Fantastic. So you can see the title of the article now. Miracles are outlasting the arguments against them. The reason I am tempted to say that there is a fallacy at play in this title is that it kind of sounds like a reversal of the burden of proof. It kind of sounds like, oh, well, they haven't yet proven that miracles aren't real. Those skeptics and atheist types, they have yet to prove that miracles don't happen. Well, I'm sorry, dear theist, but it is not my job as an atheist or a skeptic to demonstrate that your miracles don't happen. I'm sorry, that is your job. It is your job to demonstrate that miracles occur. And if you're not going to do that, then shut up. Then be quiet. Retreat from whence you came. It's just silly, right? It's just silly. But look, let's not read too much into a title. I've only skim-read this article. I haven't read it in depth, and so perhaps I'm being uncharitable. And look, let's face it, I'm not beyond being uncharitable, am I? Any long-term viewer of my channel will know that I'm not beyond being uncharitable, and I'll own that. And I'm trying to work on that, guys. I'm trying to work on that. I get a lot of pushback from people who like my content, like people who genuinely like it, and they say things like, yeah, Magic Skeptic, you know, it's a good video, right? Thanks. Good video. Thank you. But you could tone down the insults. You could tone down the swearing or the frustration or the character assassinations and attacks. And fair. Look, I get it, right? Look, guys, I'm human, right? I'm not a god. I'm not all loving, far fucking from it, right? So I get it. I'm imperfect, and I can become angry. I can become frustrated. And sometimes when you've been doing this for as long as I've been doing it, and don't get me wrong, I'm making myself sound like I've been doing this 30 years or something, but I've been doing this YouTube thing now for the better part of 6, maybe 7 years. And long before I was on YouTube, I spent all of my spare time as a hobby, basically, studying the arguments for God's existence, going to debates, reading books, devouring YouTube videos, and just consuming as much of this content as I could. So when you've been doing this as long as I have, and exploring this content for as long as I have, you gotta forgive a guy for becoming impatient with an argument that he's heard for the umpteenth time. Just please understand that. While you're watching my video and seeing my response to a particular video for the first time, you must remember that this invariably won't be the first time that I've heard the argument that's been articulated by the theists. And, likewise, theists aren't hearing anything that I have to say for the first time either. We are all standing on the shoulders of giants. And for that reason, I would extend an olive branch for a theist who might get frustrated with me by the same token, right? So, in any case, just I just wanted to clarify. Yeah, I do get frustrated, and I'm not beyond insulting someone. And fair game. If somebody wants to retort with some insults, cool. We can have a bit of a slag match, a slag off, or whatever you want to call it, an insult match, and that's totally fine. So, in any case, with that said, I want to start reading through this article, and if you guys have any super chats or anything like that, you can pop them in the chat, and I promise I will get to them. Don't worry, I won't forget you. So, with that said, miracles are outlasting the arguments against them. Let's see what this article is all about and see what the arguments are. So, New Testament scholar Craig Keener investigates contemporary accounts of signs and wonders while suggesting that many grounds for skepticism are behind the times. Interview by Christopher Rees. So this is an interview by Christopher Rees, but we're going to be exploring the ideas of Craig Keener, who is an apologist. And this is dated January 24th, 2022. So it's quite recent at the time of recording. And with that said, let's proceed here. In the halls of the academy, as well as on the street, there is no more controversial aspect of the Bible than its accounts of miracles. Skepticism about supernatural intervention in human affairs, rooted in the Enlightenment, especially the writings of philosopher David Hume. You bet your bottom dollar. What a legend Hume is. And we're going to talk about him a little bit later. In any case, has become mainstream in the modern mind. At the same time, however, there is a growing body of documented evidence, as well as compelling stories by credible witnesses of miracles taking place. A growing body of documented evidence. Gee, I wonder if this growing body of documented evidence is going to consist of little more than a growing body of testimonies. I wonder if that will be the evidence that we end up exploring here. And that's a problem. Now, I'm not suggesting that testimony is not evidence. Sometimes I see atheists, notable atheists in the atheist community and in the skeptic community, saying that claims are not evidence. And I know what they mean. What they really mean to say, if we're being charitable, is that claims are not good evidence. And I agree with that. But claims are evidence. It's just one of the most spectacularly weak forms of evidence. Can you imagine, for example, if when testing a vaccine and its efficacy, scientists said, well, we didn't go into the lab and we didn't do any medical trials, we didn't do any double-blind trials, we didn't do any animal tests, we've just decided to tell you that it's going to work. We're just going to testify that it's going to work. And, we spoke to somebody else who said that it worked, and that person spoke to somebody else who said that it worked. And there's to quote the article, there's a growing body of documented evidence of people saying that it worked, and we're going to trust those testimonials, so come here and get your jab. I mean, there's already enough hesitancy when it comes to vaccines, but if that's the way they did it, I don't think anybody would get a vaccine, right? And the same is true in a whole host of areas. Testimony on its own can be sufficient to warrant belief in everyday, mundane, trivial claims. If I call my mother tomorrow and she tells me that she went to dinner with my father, I'll just take her at her word. And that's cool. I find that to be sufficient evidence, sufficient reason to warrant belief in her claim that she went for dinner. No problem. I'll just take that on board. There's nothing life-altering, life-changing about that claim. Now, if she told me that they flew to that dinner on a magic carpet, I'm now imagining my mum and dad like Aladdin flying to dinner in our hometown in Ireland, and that is the most ridiculous image that I have ever conjured in my life, and I will probably remember it for the rest of my existence, however long that might be. In any case, if she follows up the story and tells me that, suddenly her word won't count as enough evidence to believe that claim. Now, just to be clear, it's not to say that I would believe that she was lying to me. It's not to say that I would be accusing my mother of being a liar. My mother wouldn't lie to me. I'm not convinced she would ever lie to me. She has been nothing other than honest with me my whole life. So I would believe that she was telling me the truth. But please notice, dear listener, that just because somebody is telling the truth doesn't mean that their underlying claim is true. What they're doing is reporting to you, to the best of their ability, what they believe happened. And people can be mistaken. Maybe my mother had a hallucinogenic dream. Maybe she had some kind of a drug response to a new tablet that the doctor gave her, some pain medication. My mother tends to suffer with her back. Maybe he gave her a new pain med that interacted and gave her a trippy hallucinogenic experience. People can hallucinate even without drugs. I'm currently in the midst of reading through Carl Sagan's book, The Demon-Haunted World. It's fantastic, by the way. And according to Carl Sagan, and I literally read these words today, now, the book is dated, to be clear. That's important to remember. I think it was published like in the 90s or something. But at the time of publication, Carl Sagan reported in his book that between 10 to 25% of people report having had some kind of hallucination. So hallucinations are not rare. My point is, there are ways of understanding what my mother reported to me when she said that they flew to dinner on a magic carpet that don't involve me taking seriously the metaphysics of flying carpets. I don't have to suddenly believe in flying carpets. There are other ways of potentially explaining it. And the overall point is that I'm going to accept trivial claims on the basis of somebody's word. But as soon as you start making rather fantastical claims like flying to dinner on a magic carpet, you bet your bottom dollar I'm going to expect more than your word. It's that simple. And if you think anything other than that, dear listener, prepare to be conned. Because the world is filled with people who have tall and interesting tales to tell you. And if just hearing somebody say that it happened is enough for you to believe it, well, I've got news for you. You're not a skeptic. You're not a skeptic. It's as simple as that. Skepticism is about erecting an epistemology that makes it improbable, not impossible, because, that's just not on the cards. But skepticism is about erecting an epistemology that makes it less likely for you to be baffled by bullshit. It's about erecting an epistemology that makes it less likely for you to end up believing nonsense and hogwash. And taking people at their word when they make fantastical claims is a good way to end up believing nonsense. And so I don't take people at their word when they tell me fantastical things, regardless of how sincere they are. I can both believe that they're telling me the truth and that they're uttering a falsehood simultaneously. Now, that might sound strange. What I mean is they're telling the truth. They're reporting it as honestly as they can, but they're just mistaken. They're just mistaken. You can be honestly mistaken about something. And that's an important distinction to make there, because some people will interpret that statement as, so you're just calling all people who claim miracles have occurred liars? Well, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not calling all people who claim miracles have occurred liars. That would be preposterous. Although, I think it might be worth noting that there are liars among the bunch. Of course there are. Of course there are going to be people who lie about these things, especially when there are websites like this Christian website here, Christianity Today, who are going to give you attention should you tell such a tall tale. Especially when the world is filled with gullible people who lack skepticism, who are going to queue up and listen to your story or potentially purchase your book. There are financial incentives. There are social incentives. This is not controversial, folks. So of course there are going to be liars among those who claim that miracles have occurred or whatever other woo somebody is alleging. But again, I'm not tabling seriously the hypothesis that all or even the majority of these claims are examples of deception. I'm actually happy to grant, and it's not just me granting it for the sake of discussion, I actually believe that the majority of these claims are sincere. I just think that there are better ways to explain them other than appealing to the metaphysics of the magic carpet by way of analogy. So in any case, let's proceed with the article and see where we go here and what evidence there is. So, as I just read, there's a growing body of documented evidence according to the writer of the article, as well as compelling stories by credible witnesses of miracles taking place. Okay, moving on. 10 years ago, prominent New Testament scholar Craig Keener assembled a large collection of this evidence in his 2-volume work, Miracles, The Credibility of the New Testament Accounts. And he returns to the topic in his latest publication, Miracles Today, The Supernatural Work of God in the Modern World. Freelance writer and editor of the Worldview Bulletin, Christopher Reese, spoke with Keener about the reasons for widespread skepticism of miracles and about some of the amazing stories in his new book. I'll read that sentence again. I tripped over. Forgive me, dear listener. So, skepticism of miracles and about some of the amazing stories his new book recounts. There we go. You wrote a 2-volume book on miracles in 2011, a topic you revisit in this current book. Why has this been an important subject for you to write about? My regular job as a New Testament scholar, and one of my regular job is as a New Testament scholar, and one of my interests is historical study about Jesus and his first followers. Sometimes critics have dismissed miracle stories in the Gospels and Acts simply because they recount miracles. They often do make exceptions for potentially psychosomatic cures, but normally not for instant healings of blindness, raisings from the dead, or stilling storms. The idea is that such reports must be legends that couldn't really go back to eyewitnesses. And is that not reasonable? If a story contains an absurdity that reason suggests is unlikely, if a story contains a fantastical element that you have thus far encountered no good evidence for, that you have no inductive experience of, and that nobody has ever demonstrated the truth of course that sheds light on the probability of the story's falsehood. Of course it does. Like I said, go back to the analogy of my parents going to dinner. If they say they're going to dinner, that's one claim. If they say they're going to dinner on a magic carpet, does that not increase the probability that this story is false? I mean, what other conclusion am I to arrive at? Again, I'm not saying that this demonstrates with certainty that the story is false. I'm not going to get into a reversal of the burden of proof. Clearly, if my mother and father want me to believe that they went to dinner on a magic carpet, it's up to them, to demonstrate the truth of that claim. It's not up to me to disprove it. But when they tell me that story and I hear the magic carpet element, of course my ears are going to perk up. My skepticism radar is going to start flashing bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. And not, please notice I've said bullshit, not liar, liar, liar. Right? It can be bullshit without being a bullshitter. You can be hoodwinked by bullshit, right? You can re-articulate bullshit, regurgitate bullshit because you yourself believe the bullshit. There goes my monetization. The point is, guys, if a story contains a fantastical element, of course it raises questions about the authenticity of the story. But the way the article words it here, Keener seems to be suggesting that scholars are being unfair. How dare they question the authenticity of these Bible stories when they include such gems as people being brought back from the dead, miraculous healing of blind people, or the stilling of storms, and so forth? How dare we have skepticism about the likelihood of those things actually occurring? And how dare we not believe it when all that exists is the word of this book, this Bible, that we have no original texts for? The Bible is a collection of books that are based on copies, of translations of copies, without any originals. And we're supposed to take these words seriously, even if they contain fantastical, hitherto unobserved elements that have not been demonstrated to be true, but we're being the unreasonable ones here. I mean, don't make me laugh. So we're not off to a good start with this article, but I suppose that's to be expected when we're reading an article from a website with the title of Christianity Today. But let's proceed and see where we get with this. Okay. Yet, I always found that approach problematic. Yeah, I bet you did. You're a Christian. Since I know of many eyewitness reports like this in my own circle and have witnessed some events like this myself. In my 2-volume book, I was seeking to challenge the prejudice against eyewitness claims to miracle events of this sort. Prejudice. I mean, I suppose it is a prejudice. I mean, he's not wrong. It is a prejudice, but I'll tell you what it's a prejudice against. Bullshit. It is a prejudice against bullshit. And if you want to accuse me of that prejudice, sign me up. I am prejudiced against bullshit. No problem. I will accept and adopt that label proudly. Where do I need to sign? Show me the piece of paper. Initiate me into the hall of people who are prejudiced against bullshit. No worries. No problem at all. I will accept that label. But the way he talks about this, you'd swear he was, a champion of the LGBTQ plus movement. Something I'm very sympathetic to. Being prejudiced against LGBTQ plus people is despicable as far as I'm concerned. And that's the way he's talking about people being prejudiced against magical fairy tale stories. Right? Please notice the tone here. Now, maybe I'm reading too much into it. Tone is something that's perhaps subjective. Maybe I'm making too much of this, but correct me if I'm wrong, dear listener. Maybe you can tell me in the comments. But I feel like I'm detecting a kind of tone of indignation that skeptics and scientists and atheist types are prejudicial against the eyewitness accounts that would seek to demonstrate the validity and the truth and the soundness of miracle claims. Yeah, give me a break. Unfortunately, that book is 1,100 pages long, so most people never had the time to read it. For that reason, it seemed important to revisit the subject with a much shorter, more readable book. To make it more accessible, I condensed the philosophic and other material and elaborated specific accounts, which I tried to keep short, like many New Testament accounts. Among these, I favored especially those with multiple witnesses, with special appreciation for when doctors were witnesses. This is something that's going to come up quite a bit here. As soon as there's a doctor present, Christians like to kind of drop the mic or something. Oh, there was a doctor. You can't question it. You can't question it. A doctor's an expert. You can't question it. I couldn't give a shit if a doctor was present. Because doctors are people too. Doctors can be fooled. Scientists can be bamboozled. Right? If you don't believe me, look up the experiments that were conducted by the amazing Randy, who has now passed away. May he rest in peace. But the amazing Randy demonstrated with considerable clarity that scientists can be bamboozled. I've forgotten the name of the experiment, but if somebody wants to jump into the comments, into the chat, they can tell me. But there's amazing research done where the amazing Randy sent some magicians who posed as psychics and mediums and spoonbenders, sent them to a laboratory for scientists to test them and to see if they were actually capable of what they were claiming to be able to do. Bend spoons with the power of the mind, read the minds of the scientists in the room and so forth. And Randy didn't tell these scientists, of course, that the people were magicians. This was all a setup. But the scientists were completely fooled. Right? These were expert physicists and so on. And they were completely fooled by rather simple tricks that I would be familiar with as a magician who practiced semi-professionally for decades, basically. Very simple, trivial tricks were able to fool and hoodwink those scientists, because scientists are not experts in deception. Scientists are not experts in the techniques that magicians use. Just because you're an expert doesn't mean that you can't be hoodwinked. And just because you're an expert doesn't mean that you can't be subject to, if we change the explanation from, say, magicians fooling you, even if there's no magician present, just because you're an expert doesn't mean that you're not subject to the same hallucinations that somebody else could have. It doesn't mean that you're not subject to the consequences of what drugs can do to your body. And it doesn't mean that you're, an exception to the pool of people who could perhaps have TLE, otherwise known as temporal lobe epilepsy, which is known to correlate with religious hallucinations specifically. There's all sorts of potential natural explanations for why a scientist or a doctor or an expert in any domain can be hoodwinked. In fact, I would argue that one of the tenets of skepticism is that anybody can be fooled. Anybody can be hoodwinked. There are no exceptions, folks. There are no exceptions. As soon as you think you cannot be bamboozled, as soon as you think that you cannot be deceived, and this is in any domain, whether it be in an argument, whether it be by a magician, or by a confidence trickster, or a banking scam, or an email scam where they try to dox you or get your valuable information or whatnot, as soon as you think that you are incapable of being scammed, or being hoodwinked or deceived, it's too late. You're not a skeptic anymore. It's too late. Many people have perished on that rock, my friend. Anybody can be fooled. So to go back to the article, it doesn't matter to me that there was a doctor present. That's not relevant, really, because a doctor can be fooled. Doctors can be Christian and be subject to all of the human emotions that the rest of us deal with. Things like confirmation bias, where if we really, really, really want something to be true, we might just overlook something consciously or unconsciously. Or we might want to emphasize a detail and de-emphasize another consciously or unconsciously. We might want to bury the misses and emphasize the hits. This is easy to understand when we think and reflect about human psychology, reflect on human psychology, the nature of deception and how easy it is to be fooled or even to fool oneself. So the fact that there's a doctor present really doesn't change much. The fact that there's a doctor involved doesn't really move the needle. I don't care what a doctor says. That's just another testimony. I care about what can be demonstrated. I care about what you can prove. Otherwise, all you're actually engaged in is the fallacy of appealing to authority. And again, please notice, science doesn't work this way. Can you imagine if you went to the doctor and the doctor was recommending an experimental medication for what ails you, and you asked the doctor why they believe that this medication is going to be effective, and their response was to suggest that a really smart doctor they know, who's got a better degree than they do, said that it works. That wouldn't exactly instill confidence, would it? That wouldn't exactly make you run a lap around the room in celebration about this newfound miraculous cure that's going to help you. As soon as it's explained in terms of, well, a very smart person I know said that it's a good idea, and so we should give it a go. That doesn't matter. Science doesn't operate on the basis of authority. Science operates on the basis of what you can fucking demonstrate, what you can prove through experimentation, observation, hypothesizing, and so forth. There are no scientific authorities, as Lawrence Krauss once put it. It's not about scientific authorities. The only thing that gives you currency in the scientific domain when we're using the scientific method to explore your hypothesis, the only thing that gives you currency is demonstrable evidence. You need to be able to demonstrate what you're saying is true, not just claim that it's true and not just cite an authority and say, well, he's a PhD and he said it's true, so it must be true. There was a doctor present and he said it happened, so it must have happened. I couldn't give a shit. I'm not interested in appeals to authority. PhDs are impressive, and I have a great deal of respect for anybody who achieves one. That's a fantastic thing. I don't want to take away from that for 1 second. But having a PhD doesn't mean that you're right. You need to demonstrate that you're right. Being a doctor doesn't mean that you're right. You need to demonstrate that you're right. In any case, let's proceed. So, he says that the original book was too long, so he shortened it, and he favored the stories that included multiple witnesses, and he had a particularly special appreciation for the stories where doctors were witnesses. Okay, what is your definition of a miracle? And here's where we get into the weeds, folks. There is no universally agreed on definition. Our term does not correspond exactly to biblical terminology, but probably the most useful one, with abundant historic warrant, is special divine action. Although that definition may require some defining itself. Yeah, I bet it does, because this definition is intentionally vague. If you're going to call it special divine action, well, if I'm a farmer and I need it to rain because my crop is dry, was that special divine action if then it rains after my prayer? Or would that just be a trivial occurrence and coincidence? So please notice, dear listener, according to the definition that I coined, well, I didn't coin it, but the definition that I tabled, shall we say, at the beginning of this live, such an example, such an example would not constitute a miracle. If you pray and then it rains, I wouldn't call that a miracle, sorry. That's not a miracle, because rain is a naturally occurring phenomenon. How did you rule out coincidence, for example? If you pray for rain in Ireland and it rains, well, shocker, right? If you pray for rain in sub-Saharan Africa and it rains, that might be a little bit more impressive, but you still can't rule out coincidence. The problem is it's unfalsifiable. And please notice that theists will often cover both sides of the coin here. If they pray for rain in sub-Saharan Africa and it doesn't rain, they'll just allege that God's answer was no. If they pray and it does rain, they'll say God's answer was yes, and a miracle has occurred. So, sorry about that. So you can't win. There's no way of falsifying their claim. They've got both options covered. How do we falsify it? How do we test it? How do we actually falsify that claim such that we could demonstrate its truth or falsity? How do we set up a control experiment? You see, this is a problem. If your claim is unfalsifiable, nobody should be taking it seriously. So defining a miracle as special divine action is already not passing the smell test for me. There's a bad whiff off of this definition. But let's proceed with trepidation, admittedly, but let's proceed. Believers recognize God's activity in all creation, existence, life, and DNA are all larger expressions of divine action than most miracle accounts I report. These are so pervasive and happen with such regularity that people consider them ordinary. In the Bible, though, God also acts in special or extraordinary ways in history and people's lives to reveal himself and get people's attention. So this is already incredibly problematic. Recognizing God's activity in all of creation, existence, life, and DNA. So the constant appeal to DNA, despite the fact that DNA is a self-replicating molecule, despite the fact that we actually have a good understanding of how DNA evolved over time, we have a good understanding of a hell of a lot of what was just listed there, and suffice to say, it all operates without the assumption, as Pierre Simon Laplace might put it, it operates without the assumption of the divine. And so why would we insert God here? It's an unnecessary hypothesis. It just doesn't belong. It's just completely unnecessary. And if you do find a bit that we don't understand and say, there's where God belongs, well, then you're just guilty of God of the gaps. The most obvious example here is abiogenesis, otherwise known as the question of how life came from non-life. We don't know the answer to that, scientifically speaking. And so what do theists often claim? Well, God did that, obviously. But please notice that the very minute, if and when, we discover how life originated, theists will just say that whatever that is, so X created life. Well, God created X. They'll just push it back one step. You see, there's no discovery that you can't insert God before. Before the Big Bang cosmology, theists just said that God created the universe. Now that we have Big Bang cosmology, and that appears to be the best explanation with an embarrassment of evidence to support it, what do theists say? Well, God must have caused the Big Bang. You can't win with these people. You can't win with these people. All you can do is draw attention to the ad hoc nature of the reasoning. All you can do is draw attention to the absurdity. And then people got to make up their own minds. And that's what I try to do on this channel. So these examples that he lists, calling it creation, by the way, is just utterly ludicrous. This is something that theists do. What's his name? The banana man, Ray Comfort. When he says creation needs a creator. Well, of course creation needs a creator, but you haven't fucking demonstrated that the earth is a creation, have you? Demonstrate that it's a creation, and then we'll know that it needs a creator, right? You can't just play word games, right? As somebody in my comments once said, a universe needs a universer. That's really funny. So yeah, I mean, just you got to be weary of these word games, right? But in any case, the point here is that this list of things, they're either assertions or appeals to God of the gaps, or some combination of the two. None of this counts as a good example of a miracle. You sometimes hear Frank Turek say, to the atheists out there who think that miracles don't occur, well, the universe exists, so the greatest miracle of all has already occurred. Well, that reveals a lot about Frank Turek's definition of what a miracle is, doesn't it? Because as far as we can tell, the universe is a naturally occurring phenomenon. We understand how the universe came about from the Planck time all the way to now. We have a good understanding of how the Big Bang led to this. Now, we don't know what caused the Big Bang. And they'll say God did it, but there you go. God at the gaps yet again. An assertion that is baseless and that they have no good evidence for. The point I'm trying to make is, if you're going to suggest that the existence of a universe constitutes a miracle, well, then you're just defining naturally occurring phenomena as miraculous, in which case the growth of a blade of grass is also a miracle. So I've got 100,000 miracles out in my garden. I'm sorry, dear listener, but this is only believable insofar as you are credulous. So I'm just not going to buy it. I'm going to need more than the assertion that the miracle that I need is the universe, and that's enough to constitute the existence or good evidence for the existence of a God. So, continuing here with the article. We may not always be able to clearly define the boundaries between general and special divine action, since even in special events, such as the parting of the sea in Exodus, which we mentioned earlier, God may use ordinary causes in extraordinary ways. Exodus says God blew back the sea with a strong wind, but plenty of events are extraordinary enough that virtually any observer would consider them special or extraordinary. I don't mind something being considered special or extraordinary. If this is the one and only universe, if the multiverse turns out to be false, well, then this universe is special and extraordinary, kind of by definition. If it's the only universe that exists, it's unique and singular, and I would have no problem calling it special or extraordinary, but I just wouldn't be prepared to call it a miracle, and I wouldn't be prepared to say that a God had anything to do with it. Those things would have to be demonstrated. I'm not beyond acknowledging the splendor of the universe. That's very often where an atheist gets their meaning. I feel very deep feelings of profundity when I look at the night sky and I look at the stars, and when I consider how small I am in the grand scheme of things, be it cosmic time or the sheer size of the observable universe. And that's just the observable universe. When you consider how many stars, each of which is a sun with other planets orbiting it, when you consider how large the universe is, it's just utterly mystifying and profound, and I love it. I feel very deep feelings when I think about those things. I'm not beyond feeling feelings of profundity and romance about reality. I just don't think a burning bush adds to it, and I don't think there's any good evidence for the burning bush. Sorry. If anything, the burning bush kind of cheapens the whole thing. It kind of makes it, I don't know, like it's like a bad fairy tale. Disney does better stories than what you find in the Bible. What would you prefer to read? Aladdin or Cain and Abel? What would you prefer to read? Revelations, or would you prefer to watch The Lion King? Because I know what I'm picking. I know what I'm picking, and I already know the Peterson fans out there are going to say, well, you know, Magic Skeptic, you know, those stories are biblical, and we see the archetypes, and just leave me alone. Just leave me alone. I've had enough. I just can't. I'm not dealing with that today. I'm not dealing with that. That's another video. That's another video. Sorry, I'm just taking a look here at the chat on my phone every now and then. Let's see. Awesome. Okay, let's continue then. So, where was I? Okay, why do you think contemporary Westerners are so skeptical that miracles happen or are even possible? I'm not sure I share their view of Westerners as being this skeptical bunch. The eclipse of recent memory and the earthquake in New York in recent memory given what I saw in the online space and the reaction of the world, there's an alarming absence of skepticism in the Western world, as far as I can tell. People are deranged by supernatural woos of various forms, basically. Demons and gods and astrology. Oh, Jesus. It's just, the Western world is rife with that kind of stuff. And I've covered data on my channel in the past which shows that when people lose their faith, they tend to actually swap it for another woo. So yeah, they no longer believe in God, but they take up, I don't know, faith healing. or the faith healing might be a bad example because that might assume a theistic point of view, but you know, they become a practitioner of woo healing. So they they jump hook, line, and sinker into homeopathy, or they end up practicing tarot cards and psychic readings and all this kind of stuff. So there's actually good evidence to suggest that there isn't any real good penetrating skepticism. It's something that I covered in my previous live. If you're interested, go back and watch my previous live. I think it was titled something like, "Was Skepticism Ever Widespread?" And there I articulate a very depressing hypothesis that actually, no, we don't live in a very skeptical world at all. We haven't advanced beyond the medieval period insofar as beliefs are concerned. In technologically, yes, but belief-wise, no. In many ways, not universally, of course. So that's very depressing, and we'll move on from that now. So, in any case, this alleged skepticism that Westerners have, why do we have it? According to this article, the roots go back to the radical Enlightenment. The radical Enlightenment couldn't just be the Enlightenment, must be the radical Enlightenment. Of course, reason has to be interpreted as radical, because reason is the enemy of any theist, it seems to me. But the idea was popularized especially by David Hume's essay Against Miracles, which took over some deist arguments of the day. Many people today take for granted the assumptions he published without always realizing the historic source of their assumptions. Hume's essay falls into two parts. In the first, according to what I think is the most straightforward reading, he defines miracles as violations of natural law. He certainly does. He also defines natural law as something that can't be violated. Therefore, his very definitions effectively define miracles out of existence. His idea of natural law borrows from Isaac Newton and and early proponents of Newtonian science. They, however, believed not only that God established nature's laws, but also that he transcended them and could act within nature as he pleased. So this is the claim I'm going to focus on here. So he defines miracles as violations of the natural law. He also defines the natural law as something that can't be violated. Therefore, his very definitions effectively define miracles out of existence. If you read that sentence again, dear listener, and read it to yourself, you would be forgiven, if you're not familiar with Hume and if you haven't read Hume, you would be forgiven for coming to the conclusion that Hume uses a semantic argument to defeat the miracle hypothesis. According to this theist, Hume defines miracles as violations of the natural law. Yes, he does. But then he defines natural law as something that can't be violated. And if that which cannot be violated, well then that which would seek to violate it can't be possible, i.e. miracles are impossible, and we know they're impossible because they are violations of the natural law, and the natural law cannot be violated, ergo by definition miracles aren't possible. That was a confusing description, but if you just drag the cursor back and listen to that again, I promise you it makes sense. So it sounds like Hume is engaged in a semantic argument against miracles, doesn't it? But here's a word of advice, dear listener, and I know it's not cool to give unsolicited advice, but here I go in vain. One should never get their summary of a skeptic's argument from an apologist, because you're sure to be misinformed. And boy, have you been misinformed here. So I'm going to go back to my main page here. I've actually done a bit of research here, guys, and I've went and I've found the exact spot in Hume's writing that this apologist is referring to. And I want you to ask yourself, is Hume engaging in a semantic argument? So I'm going to put this on screen so that you can see it and so that you can read it for yourself. I'm going to read it to you, but you can also read it to yourself. And ask yourself, is Hume making a semantic argument? Is Hume defining miracles out of existence? Now, you can be the judge. I'm not going to tell you what to think. You can be the judge. I'll offer you my analysis. You don't have to take my 2 cents with any authority. I'm just some guy on the internet. Just ask yourself as I read Hume's words, and these are Hume's words, quote unquote. You ask yourself, is Hume engaged in a semantic definitional argument? Is he defining miracles out of existence? And with that question in mind, have a listen. I'm going to have to lean in here a small bit because this text is very, very small. Actually, I'll tell you what I'll do, because I have it on my phone. That would be easier rather than leaning in there. That's going to make this very, very awkward. So I have it on my phone here. Okay, let me read it from here. A miracle is a violation of the laws of nature, and as a firm and unalterable experience has established these laws, the proof against a miracle, from the very nature of the fact, is as entire as any argument from experience can possibly be imagined. Now, as Sean Carroll once noted in a discussion about Hume on stage with Sam Harris, Hume is fantastic, but he's not the clearest writer, and you're already seeing evidence of that here. So I'll do my best to translate as we go along. What Hume is saying here is that we know things by experience, inductivity as it is known. The reason I believe the sun is going to come up tomorrow is because the sun came up yesterday, the day before that, the day before, the day before, the day before, and the day before. Inductivity is a useful tool. Predicting the future based on what happened in the past is a reliable method. Sure, it doesn't always work. Sometimes it can lead us to flawed conclusions. It's not perfect, but probabilistically speaking, if it happened every other day in my life, then it's probably going to happen tomorrow too. Again, there's always exceptions to this, but this is how we function, guys. For better or for worse, we are inductive creatures. We have no choice but to use inductivity. That's how science works as well. It's how we all work. There's no way around this. Inductivity is the order of the day. We have no choice but to base our conclusions on our past experience and to use that past experience to plan for the future. That is what we do. What Hume is saying here is, given that that's the case, given that we figure things out based on our past experience, what Hume is saying in this first sentence is, you can scarcely find a more universal experience than the natural order. All of our lives independently demonstrate, inductively, the truth of the universality of the natural order, of the inviolability of the natural laws. Every single time you drop something, it falls to the ground, doesn't it? My experience is the same. And I'm pretty sure if we lined 1,000 people up against a wall and asked them, what happens when you drop your keys? What happens to them? Well, they fall and they hit the floor, right? This is a universal experience that we all have. So Hume is just pointing out that you can scarcely find a more universal inductive experience than the truth of the inviolability of the natural laws. So he's making an inductive argument, not a semantic argument. But I'll keep reading in case you don't take me at my word here. So I'll just read that first sentence again and then we'll proceed. A miracle is a violation of the laws of nature. And as a firm and unalterable experience has established these laws, the proof against a miracle from the very nature of the fact is as entire as any argument from experience can possibly be imagined. Why is it more than probable that all men must die, that lead cannot of itself remain suspended in the air, that fire consumes wood and is extinguished by water, unless it be that these events are found agreeable to the laws of nature, and there is required a violation of these laws, or in other words, a miracle to prevent them. So he's just giving examples. Your universal experience and past experience, my experience, everybody else's experience tells them that if you have some lead and you let it go, it falls towards the earth. That wood is consumed by fire, and that fires can be put out by water. These rules appear to be universal and experienced by all people. They appear to be inviolable. The natural laws appear to be inviolate. It seems to be impossible to suspend them. Okay, let's proceed here. So he said that a miracle would be required for these things to not continue to function as they have always done. All right. Nothing is esteemed a miracle if it ever happen in the common course of nature. It is no miracle that a man seemingly in good health should die on a sudden, because such a kind of death, though more unusual than any other, has yet been frequently observed to happen. But it is a miracle that a dead man should come to life, because that has never been observed in any age or country. There must therefore be a uniform experience against every miraculous event, otherwise the event would not merit that appellation. And as a uniform experience amounts to a proof, there is here a direct and full proof from the nature of the fact against the existence of any miracle, nor can such a proof be destroyed or the miracle rendered credible, but by an opposite proof which is superior. So again, that's very wordy, folks, but all Hume is telling us here is that our universal experience, that is your experience, my experience, and the experience of everybody around the world, of the inviolate nature, I should say near universal, because of course there are going to be theists who claim that they observed these things being violated, but the point stands. The near universal attestation of human beings as to the inviolable nature of the natural laws demonstrates that these laws are inviolate, that they cannot be altered, they cannot be changed. It's an inductive argument. He's not saying with 100% certainty that these things can't be violated. He's saying that our inductive experience serves as powerful evidence as to the inviolability of the natural laws. And it is for that reason that Hume thinks a suspension of the natural order isn't possible. So he's not making a definitional argument. He's not saying that miracles are impossible because he's defined it that way. He's saying that thus far as we can tell, given our universal experience, our inductive experience as human beings, the natural laws appear to be inviolable. And miracles, by their very nature, violate these natural laws. And given that we have no inductive experience of those natural laws being violated, it's unlikely that they can be violated. Ergo, it's unlikely that miracles are true. So again, you tell me, dear listener, is this a semantic argument? Has the theist in this article accurately represented David Hume's argument against miracles? Has he? Has he now? I don't think so. I think his summary of the argument is obscene. It is obscene. But if you don't take my word for it, let's go back and read it again. Hume defines miracles as violations of natural law. He's correct about that. He also defines natural law as something that can't be violated. Therefore, his very definitions effectively define miracles out of existence. No, it's not his definitions that have ruled out miracles. He makes an inductive argument and spends some time at pains making clear that he's making an inductive argument, that our inductive experience tells us that the natural laws are inviolable, and so therefore it's not wise to believe that they can be violated without, as Hume put it, a superior proof. And I find that logic quite irrefutable. I'm happy to believe in miracles as soon as somebody shows me that the natural laws can be violated. Show me the Red Sea being split by God blowing the winds. Show me a man who has been clinically verified to be dead, coming back from the dead days later or weeks later. Years later would be even better still. Show me a decomposing corpse reanimating and time reversing such that their flesh regrows, their skin regrows, restored to its original luster. Show me that. And then we can start having conversations about miracles. Mind you, even if you showed me that, you still wouldn't have proven God. And here's where the atheists get called obtuse. But remember, as the old adage goes, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. If somebody manages to reanimate a corpse, maybe there's a new science on the horizon. Right? Who knows? Who knows, right? I'm not saying that that's likely. I'm saying I don't know. I'm agnostic here. I have no idea. But just because something happened like this, it's not like all your work is done. You'd still have to demonstrate that this miraculous event is connected to a God, and then specifically your God. All of your work is still ahead of you. But in any case, let's proceed here and see what else this theist has to say. The second half of Hume's essay essentially argues that, let's just double check actually one thing. I want to make sure that I'm on the right page. I am, I think. I am, yes. Sorry, just wanted to double check, guys, that I'm showing you the correct page. So, I'm just paranoid now that, oh yeah, I'm just behind. Okay, that's okay. Sorry, guys, my mistake. So I'll continue reading the article here. Again, just little tech issues. I hope you'll forgive me for those, folks. I'm still learning here as I go along. And on that note, actually, let's just quickly double check here. I just want to see how many. Oh, we don't want to listen to that. Awesome. Okay, so let's continue with the article. I just wanted to see how many concurrent viewers we have, and we've got quite a few, so you're all very welcome, by the way. So the second half of Hume's essay essentially argues that uniform human experience should predispose us to doubt all claims about miracles. So thankfully at this point, he's now acknowledging that there's more than a definitional argument going on. But explain this. How can he claim that he's defining it out of existence up here and then go on and say this? It's just inconsistent. The second half of Hume's essay essentially argues that uniform human experience should predispose us to doubt all claims about miracles. This argument begs the question, however, of how uniform human experience is. It doesn't beg the question necessarily, no. In fact, I already acknowledge this. Most people don't experience miracles. Most people don't. That's not begging the question. That's just a statistical fact. You can just line 1,000 people up against a wall. How many of them will have witnessed a miracle, right? Clearly it's going to be a minority. And to some extent, Christians even define miracles this way, right? Miracles are rare, special. How could they be special if they're common? How could they be special if they're trivial and mundane and happen every day? So in some sense, he's kind of shooting himself in the foot here, I would argue. But look, let's not. I won't go down the road of making a semantic argument myself. Let's just proceed and see what he says here. So this argument begs the question, however, of how uniform human experience is. Even in his own day, Hume cites the medically documented healing of Blaise Pascal's niece in front of many witnesses. How does he respond to it? Basically, he simply remarks that it's unbelievable and moves on. I haven't looked up this specific passage, and I don't know, so I can't comment on it, but I can only imagine, given what I've discovered already in this article, that this is a misrepresentation. But because I'm not sure, I'll just say that I'm agnostic on this point. I just have a hunch that there might be more to that story than what the theist is suggesting. But fine, let's just take him at his word. It's not pertinent to the argument I'm going to erect here anyway. Hume's access to knowledge of human experience was far more limited, though sometimes self-limited, than what we have available today. I don't think that even Hume would have attempted to argue his case from uniform human experience today. Pew and other surveys show that hundreds of millions of people in the world today claim to have witnessed miracles. Yeah, hundreds of millions out of a population of 8 billion. So again, we're still talking about a significant minority. Sorry. So other sources indicate millions of people converted at great social cost from different ancestral traditions because they believe they witnessed or experienced extraordinary miracles beyond their indigenous healing traditions in the name of Jesus. All of these examples don't demonstrate the truth of miracles. If they demonstrate anything at all they demonstrate is the truth that the person who reported it really believed it. If somebody is willing to die for their belief in Jesus, that doesn't prove that Jesus is real. All that proves is that this person sincerely believes it. I don't get why Christians fail to see the distinction there. It's like they don't get that there's a huge leap. So many Christians make this point. Oh yeah, but there were people who were willing to die for their faith, and there were people who converted, and there were people who did this, that, and the other thing at great personal risk and all the rest of it. None of that demonstrates the truth of the proposition. All it demonstrates is that those believers were sincere. And I can quote you counterexamples from other religions, and yet you don't fall to your knees and accept the Trimurti of Hinduism. You don't accept Waheguru of Sikhism. Every religion has its sincere and committed believers who are willing to be persecuted in the name of those beliefs, and yet you don't follow those faiths. So here I am, the atheist who doesn't believe any of these religions. You're all making mutually exclusive claims, all suggesting that your adherents are willing to die for those beliefs and that demonstrates the truth of them. But all the other faiths are doing the same thing. So who am I meant to believe, if anyone? You can't all be right, but you could all be wrong. And if anybody wants to seriously take on board the idea that they could all be right, I think that's a remarkably weak argument, and perhaps we can get into it another day. Drop a chat and let me know if you want me to discuss that, and I will. But I just think that's a spectacularly weak argument myself, but I won't go into that right now. The point is, I'm not moved at all by the idea that people were willing to go to great social cost or risk their lives. All that demonstrates is that they really believed it. I mean, look at the people who will tell you, and there are millions of them in the world, who will tell you that they've had encounters with aliens, extraterrestrial visitors to this planet. And they do so at great social cost, great embarrassment. They lose friendships. They lose social clout. Sometimes they lose their jobs, or they just lose the respect of the community and so on, a form of social suicide, and yet they persist in their claims that they were abducted by aliens and experiments performed on them and so forth. Right? I mean, there are any one of a thousand examples of woo where people are willing to risk social standing and willing to risk financial loss and so on in the name of the woo that they sincerely believe, and yet it doesn't follow that the woo they believe in is true. So these kinds of arguments I just find to be, quite frankly, spectacularly weak. Spectacularly so. How do biblical scholars in the mainstream academy tend to treat the miracle accounts in the New Testament? With respect to belief in actual miracles, that depends on the scholar. Biblical scholars today span a spectrum of theological and philosophic beliefs, and their personal approach to the reality of special divine action varies no less. Because divine action is considered a theological or philosophic claim, our polite discussions of New Testament history often leave it off the table. But the question of divine action differs from the historical question of ancient experience and interpretation. Many mainstream scholars accept a core of historical tradition in many New Testament miracle accounts. In fact, a strong majority of New Testament scholars, regardless of their personal theological convictions, affirm that Jesus was experienced by his contemporaries as a healer and an exorcist. So again, to be honest, these arguments are not very moving. I'm actually happy to acknowledge the existence of a historical Christ. That doesn't change much. If Jesus really did exist as a person, that doesn't mean that he was the Son of God, and it doesn't mean that he really performed any miracles. There's all sorts of natural explanations for why people might have thought what they thought about Jesus. Right? Rumors can emerge around a particular individual. Tall tales, Chinese whispers. Jesus himself might have been a deceiver. I mean, who the hell knows? Right, there's all sorts of ways that this could have gone down. The fact that people really believed it, and the fact that there are scholars who attested the fact that Jesus' contemporaries experienced his miraculous healings and so on. Again, we get all of this from the Bible, a document that is composed of copies, of translations of copies without any originals. And I meant to take all of this seriously. And every time they refer to eyewitnesses, they're not talking about an independent account of an eyewitness and we have a letter of them sitting in a history vault somewhere. They're talking about a witness that is alleged to have witnessed it, that was written about in the Bible. The best example I can share with you is when Jesus appeared to the 500, I think is the specific number. Correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, dear listener. But when Jesus appeared to the 500, some theists, some apologists will often disingenuously say that we have 500 eyewitnesses who saw Jesus and miraculously appear to them. But that's not the case at all. What we actually have is a statement in the Bible which claims that Jesus appeared to 500 people. We don't have 500 individual accounts or letters that were written down, collated and quantified. We don't have anything like that at all. So be very wary, dear listener, when apologists start talking about eyewitness accounts. Invariably, what they're actually referring to is claims that are found in the Bible. And to my earlier point, yes, claims can constitute evidence, but it's just the weakest form of evidence, especially when we're talking about a fantastical event like a human or a god man miraculously materializing or dematerializing. Anyway. But the question of divine action differs from the historical question of ancient experience and interpretation. Many mainstream scholars accept a core of historical tradition in many New Testament miracle accounts. In fact, a strong majority of New Testament scholars, regardless of their personal theological convictions, affirm that Jesus was experienced by his contemporaries as a healer and an exorcist. Great. Jesus' healing activity appears in every stratum of gospel tradition, is acknowledged by his ancient detractors, is attested by the first century Jewish historian Josephus, and is consistent with reports of his followers' activity in Acts and over the next few centuries. According to my reading, Josephus is a dubious source. There's doubts about the integrity of Josephus as a historical source and whether or not it's been tampered with, whether or not it's a forgery. I'm not an expert on the topic, but apparently that's the case. There are also doubts about Acts and its authenticity, something worth being aware of and flagging here. But again, even if none of this was the case, and even if I'm wrong about all of that, again, all we have here are claims based upon claims, based upon claims, upon claims, upon claims. It's whispers, it's stories being spread over time. The earliest accounts, according to my reading, were written down 30 to 40 years after all of this allegedly happened. If something happened today and it was written down 40 years from now, what are the odds that it would be written accurately? What are the odds that it wouldn't have been changed by time and an oral tradition? Again, we have good understandings of these processes and how things can change over time, how stories can develop legs and tall tales and all the rest of it. I don't find any of this particularly compelling. I'm sorry, I just don't. Paul speaks of signs and wonders following wherever he was breaking new ground for the kingdom, and appeals to his own audience's eyewitness testimony of them. By every criterion of historical investigation, Jesus appears as a healer and exorcist. Whether scholars attribute this only to something like psychosomatic experiences, or whether they are willing to consider special divine activity, depends on the particular scholar and their approach. Yeah, it depends on how gullible the scholar is. It depends on how willing to accept bullshit the scholar is. It depends on whether or not the scholar is willing to accept fantastical claims based on poor evidence. That's what it depends on. You mentioned witnessing the miraculous firsthand. Can you share the details? I've witnessed some events firsthand that I think most people would consider miraculous. When I was a young Christian helping at a nursing home Bible study, one wheelchair-bound woman complained every week how she couldn't walk. One day, the Bible study leader, someone from Fuller Theological Seminary, took her by the hand and commanded her in Jesus' name to rise and walk. To both her astonishment and mine, he led her around the room. From then on, she happily walked to the Bible study. And again, stories like these are easily explicable. There's nothing miraculous about this at all. Somebody can refuse to walk and then walk on command. Somebody can believe that they're not able to walk, but because of a religious presupposition, the command to walk from a religious authority can give them the confidence that they were lacking. This happens. Right? There are people who end up in accidents and they say, that's it, they're glass half empty, I'm never going to walk again. And they sit in a wheelchair and they never try and their muscles atrophy and they end up very, very weak and so on. But the healing is happening in their legs all the time. Their injuries are actually being worked on by the body's healing mechanisms. Then they go to a place like Lourdes in France, where there's a supposedly magical Christian well that you can be dipped into and be cured of your ailments. Such a person is brought to Lourdes, dipped into the water, and then lo and behold, it instills a confidence where they tremble but walk out the other side. And it seems like a miracle. Somebody who was in a wheelchair has walked again. Hip hip hooray, a miracle has occurred. When in fact all that's happened is that their confidence was restored. Here's what I would need in order to believe that something miraculous actually happened here, or at least something that I don't understand has happened here. I would need to see convincing medical evidence that this person was actually incapable of walking. So if we had somebody with a spinal cord injury that had rendered them a paraplegic, and it's been demonstrated through x-rays or whatever technology is used, imaging technology, in order to demonstrate that they're a paraplegic, they've been a paraplegic their whole life. Take that person to this, what did they refer to him as? Bible study leader, and have him command that person to walk. If that person then stands up and walks, and we later do the imaging and we see that their spinal cord has reattached, we now have a very, very interesting phenomenon on our hands, and we need to investigate it further. Right? That would be fascinating. But to my understanding, we have no such example. We have no such example where it was demonstrated medically, both before and after, in test conditions, that a miracle has occurred, that a change has occurred. Instead, we get these wishy-washy examples where a nursing home resident was refusing to stand or walk, and then suddenly they do. This is just garbage, guys. I'm sorry. This is just garbage. This doesn't constitute good or compelling evidence for anything. It just doesn't work. And as I said already, and forgive me if this sounds condescending, if you do take a story like that seriously, you're not a skeptic. Sorry. When I was a new seminary professor, the campus ministry scheduled an outreach on the attached undergraduate campus. On the scheduled day, however, it was pouring down rain, and the forecast said it was going to pour down rain all day. A sophomore biology major led us in prayer for the rain to stop, and just after we said amen, it stopped. Then the sun came out for the rest of the day. I cannot fucking believe that this theist is citing a prayer to stop the rain as evidence for the divine, as evidence for God, as evidence for miracles. Are you kidding me? And you know what's hilarious? I performed a miracle of my own. I kid you not. I'm going to swear right now on the lives of all of my family members. May they drop dead this instant if I'm telling you a lie. When I was in lesson last year, when I was teaching a lesson as a high school teacher, we were talking about this very topic. And I mentioned the example of the rainmaker who would throw their hands up into the air, and if it coincided with the rain, the locals would think a great miracle had occurred. At which point, I then, as a joke, looked out the window and I went, "Rain!" And goodness gracious me, it started to rain. I kid you not. That is a true story, as true as I'm sitting here right now, dear listener. That really fucking happened. Am I a rainmaker? No. Is there a God? I don't think so. I'm certainly not convinced of that proposition. Did a miracle occur? Again, I don't think so. Here's the thing, the most important thing to remember. I used the exact same joke every day that week when I was teaching. And I taught that lesson several times because I had several different groups in the same year group. And so by the end of the week, I had taught the lesson like 7 times. So weren't the odds of it coinciding with the actual rain going up in a country like England where it rains frequently on and off? Do you see how the mystifying nature of it just dissipates as soon as you understand the nature of a probability distribution? And would it not be the same with prayer and miracles? Again, guys, you bury the misses and you emphasize the fucking hits. Every other time that priest went to a nursing home and commanded somebody to walk and they didn't, we didn't hear about that article, did we? That article wasn't written because that article just blows a hole in the whole story. And if we even do hear about such an example, what will they say? Oh, well, God's answer that time was no. You see, they've got all of the exits covered. Ad hoc reasoning. This is how you erect an unfalsifiable narrative for yourself, so that you don't ever have to contend with the fact that your belief might be bullshit. There you go. In any case, so I have accounts like that, but they pale in comparison with many other accounts in the book, especially in the chapters dealing with medical documentation, instant healings of blindness, raisings from the dead, and so forth. Alleged. You relate accounts in the book to many modern-day miracles. Which one stands out to you as the most remarkable? That is always a hard question for me, because there are so many that are remarkable in different ways. One of the first in the book is that of a young woman in her on her deathbed, almost completely paralyzed from multiple sclerosis. She heard Jesus' voice calling her to rise and walk, and she was instantly healed so thoroughly that she didn't even have to contend with the atrophied muscles. All three of her doctors have confirmed the account in writing, laying their own reputations on the line. She lived for 40 more years with no reoccurrence, passing away only recently from COVID-19, much to the sorrow of those of us who knew her. I don't know anything about multiple sclerosis and about whether or not it's reversible. I have no idea. Let's just assume for the sake of discussion that it isn't reversible and that it's a death sentence and that it isn't possible to recover from it, and yet this person did. The fact that it coincides with a prayer for Jesus does not prove that Jesus is real. The fact that it coincides with a Christian context doesn't mean that Christianity is true or that a God exists. What I would say on this, because I'm a skeptic, is I don't know what happened. And I would posit that they don't know what happened either. They are asserting what happened. But here's my question. How do you demonstrate that God was involved in this? Is it demonstrated by virtue of the fact that it coincided with a mention of God? Is that it? Because if that's your epistemology is fucking junk. You need to do more than that. Please demonstrate to me that God was involved. And if you know how to summon God in order to cure multiple sclerosis, why aren't you in the hospitals curing everybody else of multiple sclerosis? Or again, does God play favorites? You see, guys, the problems just amount and amount and amount. And this is even in a case where I'm demonstrating epistemic humility and saying, I don't know what happened here. But the fact that I don't know what happened here isn't evidence that their God was involved. And the fact that they say their God is involved isn't very good evidence that their God was involved. You need more than a coincidence in order to demonstrate the truth of the divine. Sorry, it just doesn't work that way. Another story is of a woman blind for 12 years, instantly healed during prayer. A fully documented case now written up in a medical journal. I wonder what medical journal that is. And I would also wonder in what sense they're writing up about it. Are they writing about it as the medical journal confirms the existence of Jesus Christ? I fucking doubt it. Maybe they're just reporting on a rather peculiar example where somebody's eyesight was restored and they don't know how it happened. Again, he doesn't link any of this, so I can't delve any deeper. He's just making claims here. This could all just be bullshit. I have no idea. So it's not going to be convincing to me. Wouldn't it have been trivial for him to include a link to the medical article there? Wouldn't that have been easy? And then we could have read it together? But no. It's all, crouching tiger, hidden dragon with these people, right? It's like just hiding things. Like just show us the evidence. Stop asserting the evidence and show us the evidence. So there are some others so remarkable that I initially hesitated to include them in the book, lest someone disinclined to believe them would discount all the others. One account that I almost always share is the one that some years ago began shifting my own perspective. There's no medical documentation because it happened in a place where no doctors were available, convenient, which was probably partly why a miracle was needed. I had heard the story before, but it was when I interviewed Antoinette Malombe in Congo, Malombe, I think, that I learned the details. Malombe's 2-year-old daughter, Teresa, cried out that a snake bit her. Malombe found her not breathing, and she ran for about 3 hours with the toddler on her back, to where a family friend was doing ministry. He prayed, and Teresa began breathing again. The next day, she was fine, even though irreparable brain damage starts after just 6 minutes without oxygen. Teresa had no brain damage. She later achieved a master's degree and just recently retired from ministry. So again, guys, without more information, it's hard to comment on this. It's possible to survive a snake bite. That's all I know. Maybe people can have unique resistance So, for example, when it came to COVID, for some people it was a nothing burger, and for others it was life-threatening, depending on comorbidities, depending on age, depending on genetics, and a whole host of factors. Some people can have, a natural or innate immunity or resistance to something, and my guess is it might be the same with snake venom. Maybe this child was one such an example. Or maybe the snake just didn't get to inject enough venom. Maybe it was a surface scratch. Who knows? There's all sorts of things that could explain this without the need to jump to, therefore God. I mean, how preposterous would it be if I told the exact same story and at the end I said, therefore, I don't know, magic. Therefore, a magical voodoo healer healed her. So voodoo is real. Or therefore time travel, because we could have just time traveled into the future where they do have a cure and then come back. Right, we could do therefore anything. You could insert any woo here as the explanation for the gap in our knowledge. But the truth is, I don't know why this child got better. I don't think that mother knows either. And I don't think this author knows. I think this author is asserting that God is involved. But I'm sorry, as Christopher Hitchens put it, and he put it beautifully, Hitchens' good old razor, that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed as such. Simple as that, folks. So, most of the miracles you recount in the book are healings of various kinds. Have you discerned any pattern as to why healing does or does not take place? In terms of patterns, most healings and other miracles recounted in the book appear in the context of people praying for them to happen. It shouldn't surprise anyone that they happen more often among people who trust God enough to ask, recognizing that he is able to act. That is bullshit, because there are more prayers happening in hospitals than anywhere else in the world, and yet we don't see a continuous stream of miraculous cures. Desperate people in hospitals praying over the beds of their children who aren't going to make it to fucking tomorrow. And you have the audacity to say what you just said. Bullshit. Fucking bullshit. Toxic nonsense. How dare you look at those parents in the eyes and tell them that, oh, well, maybe you just didn't pray hard enough. Right? Or maybe God's answer was no. God saw fit to make it rain when we prayed for him to make it rain. That was on God's agenda. But the child who died of cancer in the ward a couple of miles away, their prayers went unheard. But God made it rain when we prayed for it. He literally said that a moment ago in the article. But the other child who died in the ward nearby, fuck that child. Who cares about them, hey? This is just utterly toxic. Forgive me, dear listener, I'm getting a bit riled up here, but this is just, we're almost at the end of this. I'm looking forward to being finished, to be honest. This is a larger undertaking than I'd anticipated. So it shouldn't surprise anyone that they happen more often among people who trust God enough to ask. Yeah, explain hospitals then, you moron. Recognizing that he is able to act. Also, the most dramatic miracles happen most often, though not by any means exclusively, on the cutting edge of evangelizing unevangelized areas, a setting similar to the one in the Gospels and Acts. They also happen where they are most needed. Again, explain hospitals then, my friend. Sorry. Not to entertain us, not to get us to neglect other resources God has provided, but because of the Lord's compassion for our need. Yeah, again, explain hospitals, buddy. Explain childhood leukemia. As in the Gospels, healing also often follows persistent or desperate faith, but also, as in the Gospels, initial or deepened faith sometimes follows God's special divine action. And there are cases today where people have to show their great faith by trusting God despite not experiencing healing right away or even in this life at all. So there's your little ad hoc justification for those who died. Maybe your healing will be in the afterlife. So that explains why everybody in the hospital is dying in the terminal wards, because they'll experience their healing in the afterlife. Don't let's forget. But God did see fit to make it rain the other day when we asked him to. That was on the agenda. Give me a break. My God. This is just rotten, isn't it, dear listener? This is just rotten. Where was I? So, indeed, God's power is displayed especially in weakness. most visibly in what for a time seemed the triumph of evil at Jesus' cross. Some of the people who have witnessed the most miracles prayed for them for months or years before they began to see them. Maybe so they would learn persistent faith, or perhaps so they would learn that it is God's grace, not who we are, that makes them happen. If I pray to win the lottery today and I buy a scratch card and I don't win, and then I pray to win the lottery tomorrow and I buy a scratch card and I don't win, and then I pray to win the lottery and I buy a scratch card the next day and I don't win, if I eventually win on a scratch card 6 years from now, is that because my prayer was answered and God was putting me through a test of my faith? Or is that because I bought 6 years worth of fucking scratch cards and I'm going to win eventually? These people don't have the most rudimentary understanding of probability. Of course, if you pray for something for years, the likelihood of it occurring goes up. That's just the nature of probability. Assuming you're asking for something that is feasible or possible in this reality, then yeah, the odds of that happening. If you're praying for your mortgage rates to go down, or if you're praying for your kid to, I don't know, do well in their exams, or if you're praying for good fortune for your grandfather or what have you, there's any one of a million ways that those prayers could be fulfilled. And time is the best arbiter. This is why this isn't a good epistemology. This is the exact same kind of junk thinking that psychics and mediums use in order to demonstrate that their prophecies were fulfilled. Give me a break. Give me a fucking break. But these observations are not a model for prediction in a given case. God remains sovereign. When my friend Leo Bawe was doing research in a Nigerian village, people there asked him to pray for their dead child. After a couple of hours of prayer, he handed the child back to the parents alive. Yeah, show me medical evidence of that. But the only other time Leo prayed for someone who died, it was his best friend, and the friend stayed dead. Gee, I guess God does play favourites. When cardiologist Chauncey Crandall prayed for and shocked Jeff Markin, who had been flatlined for 40 minutes, Markin was restored. But when Crandall's own son, Chad, earlier died of leukemia, Crandall had to determine that he would trust in God no matter what. The greatest 19th century heroes, and by the way, there's an example of emphasizing the hits and burying the misses, even when it comes to your own fucking child, my God. The greatest 19th century heroes of faith, like Hudson Taylor, are no longer with us. Sickness and death remain. My wife and I experienced many miscarriages. Before our marriage, she spent 18 months as a refugee. God has been good to us, but we are also keenly aware of the reality of suffering in this world, and suffering will continue until Christ's return to put all the world right. Miracles get our attention, but they are not a panacea for all the world's problems. Skeptics often insist that if they could witness a miracle themselves, they would embrace religious belief. Is this how skeptics who were personally involved in the stories you cite have typically responded by embracing faith? First of all, that's not true. It's not the case that skeptics, a true skeptic, although I don't want to be accused of a no true Scotsman fallacy here, I'll just put it this way. Skepticism, as I defined it, would not include, as I defined it. If people want to define it differently, they're more than welcome to do so, and those people can be true skeptics as well. I'm not committing a no true Scotsman here. Skepticism, as I understand it, as I articulate it, and as I define it, would not include the idea that if I witness it, therefore it must be true. Because remember, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Just because I witness something that I don't understand, it doesn't follow that therefore it's supernatural. Just because I witness something I don't understand, it doesn't therefore follow that God is involved. That's not a good epistemology. A good epistemology asks deeper questions than that. A good epistemology is not assertive or ad hoc in nature. It's about digging down deeper into the roots. It's about constructing an experiment, figuring out the mechanisms of what's actually going on. And if we can't figure out what's going on, it's about having the humility to say, I don't know what's going on. And that's the end of it. And that's an uncomfortable answer. And religion is certainly not in the game of saying, I don't know. And that's the problem. If they had more humility and admitted what they actually don't know, the world might actually be a better place. But here we are. It's all across the board. When I was an atheist a few decades ago, witnessing a miracle probably wouldn't have converted me instantly, but it sure would have gotten my attention and turned me into an inquirer. Some sources for the book were converted through witnessing miracles. such as the healing of their paralysis or the raising of their child many hours after he was pronounced dead. Some friendly skeptics who have not been converted by their anomalous experiences have admitted that this has made them more open-minded about possibilities, but I also have a couple of skeptical friends who have told me that they wouldn't believe even if somebody were raised from the dead in front of them. Well, if somebody were raised from the dead in front of me, I would need to know how it happened. You can't just raise somebody from the dead and then assert, therefore God. So those skeptics are actually just being skeptical. That's the reasonable thing to do. How have you ruled out an advanced technology? How have you ruled out that they were really actually alive, but perhaps in some kind of a comatose state? Goodness knows that we've buried people by accident in the past, erroneously thinking they were dead. Some people have woken up in a morgue in a body bag because they were presumed dead. The pulse can reduce to such a low level that it's undetectable, and the temperature can go down and you can feel cold to the touch. It's possible to misdiagnose people. Again, there are natural explanations here. Just because somebody allegedly came back from the dead, it doesn't follow that your God exists. You have to demonstrate that. It's not that simple. If somebody comes back from the dead, not only are you going to say your God is responsible, the voodoo master over there is going to say that his voodoo incantation was responsible. The other religious adherent who believes in a completely different religion to you is going to say that this is evidence of their God. And then the Buddhist is going to say that this is evidence of reincarnation, or that this person came back as a bodhisattva to help the rest of us achieve enlightenment. All of these different religions are going to use that exact same thing and assert that it is evidence for their mutually exclusive conclusion that is different from yours. Hence the label of mutually exclusive. And I'm the only honest one in the room saying, I don't know how that person came back from the dead. I don't even know if they were dead. I don't know if some sufficiently advanced technology was used. I have no idea what's going on here. And until I know more, until I get the evidence, until I have some better understanding, I'm just going to continue being agnostic and saying I don't know what's going on here. But here we have the implication, the suggestion, that these skeptics are being obtuse, that these skeptics are being unreasonable, when in fact they're the only reasonable people in the fucking room. This spectrum fits pretty much what we see in the Bible. When Jesus raised Lazarus, some people believed, but others ran and warned Jesus' enemies. What had just happened, Jesus' enemies already had their minds made up not to believe him. Despite seeing the pillar of fire and the sea parted for the Israelites, Pharaoh's army pursued them into the sea. Pharaoh still expected his own gods to be stronger than Israel's God. We might say that he and Moses had different theological presuppositions. Although John's Gospel reports that Thomas got to see the risen Lord, it goes on to explain that it offers testimony for the sake of those who didn't get to see him. It goes on to explain that, yeah, fine. God has provided evidence already, and Jesus warns that those resistant to faith will not be converted, even if someone returns them from the dead. Nevertheless, for those who are open-minded, miracles can get their attention. And again, accusation after accusation. Turns out if you're skeptical, you're resistant. If you're skeptical, it's because you're closed-minded. When in fact the skeptics are the only open-minded people in the room. They're the only people who are actually following and honestly exploring the evidence and going where it leads, rather than leading the evidence where you want it to go. Confirmation bias. But that's all you get from apologists. Atheists, if only they were honest. If only they were open-minded. If only they weren't resistant. Well, here I am, truthfully, a non-resistant non-believer. Which is to say that if you could provide me with decent evidence for your God, I would believe it. I would believe it. But I haven't seen a shred of decent evidence. What I see is shit articles like this with a compendium of assertions and fallacies and ad hoc justifications and insults as the cherry on the cake. Fuck me. Not everybody experiences physical healing in this life, but when God does any miracle, it's a gift to every one of us. That is because it's a confirmation to us of God's promise of a world made new, of the day when he will wipe away our tears and when death and suffering will be no more. Until then, as people of his kingdom, we keep working for people's health and security in every way available to us, through medicine, through food, and sometimes through prayers for miracles that God hears and answers. And that is the article, folks. So, what did you think? What did you think? I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I would love for you to jump into the comments. I would love for you to tell me what you're thinking. I would love to get your perspective. And by the way, please do drop a like on the stream. Do that right now. If you've been enjoying this, if you've been sitting here, just drop a like on the stream. If you haven't done so already, that helps me out massively in terms of the algorithm. And just let me know your thoughts. Speaking of which, I do see that there is a super chat, and I want to get to that super chat. As I promised after reading the article, I said I would get to super chat. So if anybody has any super chats, please do make me aware. So I'm just going to give this a little heart. Thank you very much. So Rise of Azazel, I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Rise of Azazel, I hope you're still here. $5, that's very, very kind of you. Are all doctors Christians of the same particular sect as this guy, or can other religions have credible witnesses too? Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question. So what would this Christian say, Azazel? What would they say about a so-called miraculous healing that took place in India when they were praying to the Trimurti, and there was a doctor present who verified that the person actually got better? Would they accept that as independent evidence for the truth of Hinduism? Would they? I don't think they would, right? I don't think they would. I think what we have here is a very obvious case of focusing on that which proves your presuppositions and ignoring that which challenges your presuppositions. That's what's going on here. This is what theists have been doing for centuries. Like I said countless times during this conversation, they emphasize the hits and they bury the misses. That is what happens here. So I think Azazel is absolutely spot on. They're going to ignore all of the testimony for other religions. And those religions have an absolute cavalcade of testimony to support their claims as well. Of course they do. There's a rich history of testimony in Hinduism and in Buddhism and in Sikhism and in the other faiths around the world. I mean, look at the example. This is an example that Sam Harris used, and I thought it was a great one. If you look at the Indian guru, Sati Sai Baba, you can meet people today who will testify that they witnessed his miracles. Right? An Indian guru performing miracles in our time. Now, if I'm not mistaken, let me just double check before I say too much. I think he's now dead. But when I say our time, I mean our time as in, the 21st century. So yes, Sati Sai Baba was born in November 1926 and he died in April 2011. But suffice to say, this is contemporary, right? He died in 2011, but there are people alive today who you can speak to, because 2011 isn't that long ago. There are people alive today who you can speak to directly who will testify as to the miraculous powers of Sati Sai Baba. This is eyewitness testimony that doesn't rely on an ancient text that has no original copies, a text that is composed of copies of translations without any originals. And that's what we're using as our eyewitness testimony for the miracles that occurred during the ministry of Jesus. Those alleged testimonies. Remember, they're not actually testimonies in the traditional sense. We don't actually have written documents of these people saying what they're saying. What we have is biblical writers claiming that these people are witnesses, which is a slightly different thing. You can meet actual witnesses of the alleged miracles of Sati Sai Baba. Today, you can speak to them and they will tell you and they will testify and they will talk about how it's transformed their life, how it's enshrined and strengthened their faith. And Christians like the one who wrote this article don't have a whimper to say on this matter. They don't have a sentence. They don't have anything to offer other than just silence. Now, look, to be fair, he probably has a lot to say on that. He probably has arguments against Hinduism. He probably has thoughts on the falsehood of other gods and so on. But the problem I have is that there's still testimony for these other faiths. So you have to ignore that testimony, or you have to explain it away or use a natural explanation for that testimony, as I've done with the testimony he gave of miracles, and then say that those natural explanations apply to all of the other religions except my own. And that is just too much to take. That is just too much to take. That is utterly laughable. And we've got another super chat. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Meridian Heights. I really appreciate the $2. Every little helps, and it really, really means a lot. And of course, Meridian writes in just to be an absolute champ. Good show. Appreciate your work. You're so kind, Meridian. I really, really appreciate that. Like I said, every single cent, every dollar goes towards bringing more of these live streams to you guys. And I'm loving doing these live streams. And if you're loving them, again, let me just remind you, just please drop a like on the video. That would be very, very much appreciated. It helps it out with the algorithm. But yeah, it seems to me that it's essential for Christians of the world to denounce the testimony of all other faiths except their own. Oh wow, Kenneth Darkwater, thank you so much. Kenneth doesn't even submit a message. Just to be nice, Kenneth submits a $1 super chat there. That's incredibly kind of you, Kenneth. I really, really appreciate that. I'm sorry guys, now I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but like I said, every dollar helps. So I'll just read Kenneth's comment beneath, because Kenneth didn't include a comment with the super chat. Wish I had been home to watch the whole stream. Kenneth, it will be available for your viewing pleasure the very minute it ends, or even right now. As far as I'm aware, you can actually drag it back and you can watch the live stream from the start if you just take it and drag it back to the start. And I hope you enjoy it. When it does go live on the channel, feel free to jump into the comments and let me know what you thought. I'd really appreciate your feedback on it, because again, I'm still experimenting with the whole live stream thing. But yeah, guys, so we've explored a lot here in this stream this evening, and it's gotten very heavy in a few places, and I hope it's been worth it. I hope people have taken something from this, whether it be the fallacies that were identified, or the ad hoc reasoning, or the misrepresentation, the gross misrepresentation of Hume that was on display in this article. These kinds of arguments that theists deploy when it comes to miracles and religious experiences, in my view, they kind of rank at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to religious arguments. When I was still a theist myself, I was much more persuaded by the, like the cosmological argument or the design argument or that kind of thing. I always found those much more persuasive. When you look at the complexity, I'm not saying these arguments are good now, obviously. I don't believe them anymore. But when I was a theist, it wasn't the miracle arguments that persuaded me. It wasn't the religious experience arguments that persuaded me. It was the more logical arguments, the syllogistic arguments, like the Kalam cosmological argument or Paley's watchmaker and things like that. Those were the arguments that really kind of spoke to me, and that's still the case. I still find those more persuasive. I don't find them truthful. I find them utterly fallacious and ridiculous, but I still find them more persuasive than I do these miracle and religious experience arguments. And I hope that this stream has done something to demonstrate to you, dear listener, why these miracle arguments or religious experience arguments are really bottom of the barrel. And as I said earlier in the stream, be very, very wary and be very, very careful when it comes to a theist summarizing the view of a skeptic, because what you'll often find is that bullshit is afoot. So guys, if there's no other chats at this point, I'm going to start bringing this to a close. I've had a really, really great time tonight, and I really, really appreciate you guys joining me here. It's been great fun, and if you want to see more of this, if you're enjoying these live streams, I mean, I'm still figuring this out. If you have any suggestions or any constructive criticism or anything like that, feel free to just comment on any one of my videos, including this one. It will be available on the channel as a VOD the very minute the stream ends, as far as I'm aware. So feel free to comment there, or jump into the chat now and comment or whatever. Just let me know if there's any if there's any suggestions you have, anything you'd like me to do with this stream, or even if you don't like them, just be honest. If you say, you know what, Magic Skeptic, not a big fan of the whole live stream thing. I prefer if you focused all your time on your edited videos. That's fine too. I won't take that personally. I'm honestly asking for feedback, and there's no point in you telling me lies and blowing wind up my ass and telling me it was great if you didn't enjoy it. So be honest. Oh wow, I got another super chat here. That's fantastic, Thomas. Datilo, I really $10. Wow, Thomas, that's so incredibly generous of you. I really, really appreciate that. My God, Thomas, thank you so much. Still praying to your thermos. Beverages still cold. Miracle or refrigerator. Great show. Thanks. That's very funny, Thomas. If you don't know what Thomas is referring to, I did another live stream where we spoke about the absurdity. This is what Thomas is talking about. It's such a great callback. Where we spoke about the absurdity of prayer and the verification of prayer. And I mentioned George Carlin and he's a comedian, dead now, but he did a great bit on how he prayed to Joe Pesci. And when he prayed to Joe Pesci, an actor, sometimes he got what he wanted and other times he didn't. A lot like when you pray to God. And so my recommendation to the stream was to pray to my... What the hell is that stuck on my thermos? Was to pray to the holy thermos. And as... you won't believe this. I should actually do a stream on this. I have received dozens. I kid you not, folks. I swear. I have received dozens of prayers to my thermos ever since that live stream, and they're fucking hilarious. So I'm going to repeat what I said. Thomas, thank you again so much for that super chat. That really means the world. $10, man. That's incredible. Your generosity is beyond reproach. I really, really appreciate it. But I'm going to repeat the request. Pray to the holy thermos, and you might just get what you want. Maybe you've got an exam coming up soon. Pray to the holy thermos for a good result. Right? Maybe you've got a very important mortgage meeting coming up soon. Pray to the holy thermos for a better mortgage rate. Let me know. Oh, wow, Paddy, thank you so much. I've got another super chat here from Paddy. Paddy's actually a good friend of mine. Paddy, I'll get you back with a pint, and you know I will. Let me just give you a little heart there. So what does Paddy write here? Do you have any machinations of streaming any other content such as reactions to news, films, guests, etc.? That's a really, really good question, Paddy. I would love to do guests. So some of you may have seen recently, and thanks, Paddy, for the $5. That's incredibly generous. I really, really appreciate it. I will get you back when I see you, I promise. As I said, guys, Paddy's a good friend of mine. We've been friends for years and years and years in Ireland. He's a great guy. But in terms of guests, now that maybe I shouldn't say this out loud because I haven't asked these people yet. But look, it's true. Look, let me just say it, right? I would love to do a series. I have an idea. I've already got a title for it and everything. I would love to do a series where I interview atheists. Maybe streaming, maybe edited, I'm not sure. But I would love to do a series where I interview people like Matt Dillahunty. And now that I've, worked with Matt and worked with Paul Ogia and so on, I would love to do a series where I interview the various internet atheists and ask them what makes them tick. Ask them questions that nobody's ever asked them before. What's Matt Dillahunty's favourite movie? I don't know. Does he even like movies? I'd love to know the answer to that question. I don't know the answer to that question. Just simple things, like more like a kind of an interpersonal interview, not an interview that's, all philosophical and let's have a debate. Just like, let's get to know who these people are, because we all know Matt Dillahunty, the fire-breathing atheist who shouts at callers on the Atheist Experience, and I absolutely love that, and he does more than that, of course, but that's the stereotype of Matt that exists in the ether, right? I would love to get to know these people, and maybe they wouldn't be open to it, because what I'm talking about is a bit maybe Diane Sawyer-y for them. Maybe it would just get shot down, and maybe nobody would like it, but it's just one idea I have, Paddy, that I'm thinking about doing. In terms of films, I don't have any plans for films. I don't really see that working on my channel the way I've set it up. my audience expects philosophical content. Maybe I could do philosophical critiques of movies. There's definitely, I do have a video planned about The Last of Us vis-a-vis meta-ethics that I really want to make. So maybe something like that might be feasible. In terms of streaming, I don't have any other immediate plans other than to just keep trying these streams, reading through articles and trying a few bits and pieces. As you saw tonight, I'm still working out the kinks in the whole thing, including the sound. I'm definitely going to do a little bit of in fact, Paddy, you might be of assistance to me in that. And perhaps I'll call you one of the days and you can help me to figure out why the audio is a bit low on this mic. Maybe it's just a generic problem with the mic itself. But that would be wonderful to talk about at some point. But yeah, in any case, that those are the plans for the immediate future. And other than that, I just plan on continuing to upload my usual videos of the most annoying religious people, when theists fail, a magician's thoughts, and so on. If anybody's interested, some of my upcoming videos include, I've got a video coming up on John Cleese. I've got a video coming up about Sam Harris. I've got another video about Jordan Peterson coming up. My most recent Jordan Peterson video went down a treat. It appears to have been very successful. I think I annoyed a lot of the Jordan Peterson fans. But I stand by everything I said in that video. I think what I said in that video is, I know I would say this because I'm the one who said it, but I think what I said in that video holds. Sorry, I mean, if you disagree with me, cool. And I did say in the video that the point I was making was somewhat intuitional, and that if your intuitions differ from mine, you're going to find the video objectionable. And that certainly happened. There was some sparks in the comment section. If you haven't watched my latest video, Jordan Peterson video, I would recommend watching it. Not least if you just click in. Even if you don't watch the video, just read through some of the comments and you'll see some sparks flying there in the comments. So yeah, I'm just, guys, can I just say, just by way of bringing this to a close, thank you so much. Like, I mean, like, how long have I been streaming here? According to my readout, I've been streaming over 2 hours now, and you guys have just sat here and you've listened and you have submitted super chats and you have been generous with your time, and the chat has been flowing, and I've been having fun, and case in point, I've just received another super chat. Rise of Azazel, thank you so much. That's the second super chat that Rise has submitted. You're far too kind. Words fail. I don't know what to tell you. Have you noticed that most internet atheist personalities are ex-theists? Do you think it's the zealotry of the convert, or more that they have been adversely affected by religion? That is a fucking good question. Right. So, what I'll say to that, Azazel, and thank you so much once again for the super chat, another $10. That's incredible. You're far too kind. What I'll say to that, Azazel, is this. I'm not a mind reader, and so I think it would be inappropriate for me to diagnose other internet atheists. Having said that, I agree with you that I have noticed some hints of what you are driving at. I mean, look, let's face it. Most internet atheists were, in fact, theists in the past. Matt Dillahunty was going to be a preacher, right? Paul O'Gia was a devout Christian who had memorized significant portions of the Bible. Shannon Q herself as well, if I remember correctly, was a Christian. I myself was a Catholic borderline creationist who thought that evolution was folly, right? There's definitely a subset, at least, of the online atheist community who were themselves theists in the past. I don't think it's fair to call them zealots. I think every atheist goes through their angry phase, and Paulie was in the comments earlier. Paulie could tell you a thing or two about my angry atheist phase. Perhaps I'm saying too much. Paulie will hang me out to dry in the comments. But I definitely went through my angry atheist phase. But Azazel, isn't that understandable? And I'm not suggesting that you're saying that it isn't understandable. I'm just speaking rhetorically here. Isn't that understandable? Right? Isn't it? Right? You've been lied to, for lack of a better term. Not consciously, but you've been hoodwinked by a folly, either consciously or unconsciously, by those who taught it to you. And then you discover that it was all bullshit. You discover that that afterlife you were looking forward to is fictitious. You discover that that hope you placed in seeing your loved ones again is a phase. It's a lifestyle, says Potty. You discover that those loved ones you were going to see again, you're not going to see anymore. That hope that kept you together in your weakest moments, your lowest moments, where you thought Jesus has got your back, you realize it's all bullshit. That's going to make you angry, right? Not to mention the fact that some atheists, when they deconvert, they go through much worse than what I did. Thankfully, my family still loves and embraces me and don't see my atheism as a problem in the slightest. But someone like Matt Dillahunty, and the only reason I say this is because he's been quite open about it himself, as Hazel, he's been, like, his relationship with his family has been significantly hindered. There are atheists who lose their loved ones. There are atheists who get ostracized by their communities. That's going to make somebody fucking angry, right? There are atheists who lose their jobs. There are atheists who lose their lives for having come out of the closet as an atheist. Look at Saudi Arabia, for example. Or even if they don't lose their life, look at the Bible Belt in the United States, where it's risky to self-identify as an atheist. You might be assaulted, right? It's dangerous to be an atheist in certain parts of the world. And so being angry and looking at the rise of the religious right in the United States and, say, the reversal of Roe v. Wade and how people have lost their access to abortions and so on, looking at the detrimental effects that religiosity is having in our world, looking at religious-inspired terrorism and so on, it's hard not to be angry about a lot of this, right? Looking at children being indoctrinated, looking at the fact that there's a psychiatry branch in the United States now called fear of hell syndrome and religious trauma syndrome, where people need counseling because they wake up every night screaming because of their belief in hell, and their skin is going to peel off and regrow and peel off and regrow as they burn for eternity. Religion has a lot to apologize for. And so I think perhaps what some people might call zealotry, I would just call passion, Azazel. Make no mistake, I'm a passionate atheist. And I think that's what Paddy might have been referring to when he said lifestyle. Paddy put it really well one night when we were having a conversation with somebody else who had the cheek to refer to me as a theist. They were going down the Jordan Peterson line of saying, but you don't act like an atheist, you act like a theist. That ridiculous, stupid, moronic argument. Paddy said on that given night, but what do you say about someone like Dara? Dara lives an aggressively secular lifestyle. That was the exact phrase Paddy used. I put it in the memory bank because it was such a good way of putting it. I live an aggressively secular lifestyle. I've dedicated my whole life to this, right? I spend copious amounts of hours editing videos and speaking with you guys and having conversations like this. I attend talks. I go and see Richard Dawkins speak when he appears in London or Ireland or wherever. I went and I watched Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris debate live in Dublin when they appeared there, and I was frustrated that I didn't get to their London appearance, but I was too busy at the time. I spent all my time reading books about the arguments for God. I'm currently listening to, as I mentioned earlier in the stream, The Demon Haunted World by Carl Sagan, and as soon as I'm finished with that, I'm going to be moving on to another text which is tangentially or directly related to the theism atheism debate. So I think what Azazel, and this is a very long answer to your question, but I feel like your question deserves a long answer. Not because of the size of the super chat, but because it's just a deep question. I think what some people identify as zealotry is a mislabeling of passion. I'm definitely a passionate atheist, and I can see how that could come across as zealotry or hatred or bigotry almost, but it isn't. Truthfully, I have no hate in my heart, right? I feel nothing but appreciation and love when I do this. I get annoyed sometimes. I wouldn't say it rises to the level of hate. I might use the word hate colloquially sometimes, but I'm a very chill, happy guy in my life. And yes, I get frustrated about the effect that religion is having in the world, and there might be certain specific tenets or practices that I might hate, but the idea that I hate religion, or that the idea that I have a kind of a zealotry because I was affected by religion or something, I don't think that would be the best way to put it. And I can only speak about myself there. Maybe it is fair to say that some other internet atheists are actually being zealots. Maybe they're actually being hateful in their commentary. Maybe they're being too... I mean, like Christopher Hitchens, right? Christopher Hitchens is the poster child for atheists with animosity. But if you go back and listen to the stuff Hitchens was saying, and I've listened to every word the man has ever uttered, to say that he was a zealot actually doesn't make any sense to me at all. It doesn't make any sense to me at all. Hitchens was passionate, articulate, and well-informed. It doesn't mean that I agreed with him on everything. It doesn't mean I agreed with him on everything. But whatever he was going to say, you could bet your bottom dollar that he was going to say it beautifully. He was going to articulate it in a manner that nobody else could articulate it. And he was going to do so with passion and rhetorical style. If you want to call Hitchens a zealot, I mean, words are our playthings, and I'm not a prescriptivist. Maybe you have a definition of zealot that Hitchens fits in. But my understanding of the word wouldn't put Hitchens in that box. It wouldn't put me in that box. It wouldn't put Matt Dillahunty or Paulo Gia in that box. And just to be clear, I've met some of these people behind closed doors. I've worked with Matt Dillahunty now a number of times. I've worked with Paulo Gia. These guys are just delightful, kind, charitable, lovely human beings. They are so just... I'm running out of adjectives. They're just so eternally decent. The very first thing Matt knows that I have an interest in magic. The very first thing Matt said to me when I met him, oh, by the way, I've got this amazing deck of cards that you'll appreciate as a magician, so tell me your postal address. And Matt has posted those cards to me. He's just an eternally decent, kind, charitable, lovely human being. And I am eternally grateful to Matt and Paulo Gia and everybody over at The Line, Jimmy, Shannon Q, and so on. They've welcomed me with open arms. And the idea that any of those people would be considered zealots just doesn't make sense to me. And I would have given you the same answer a year ago before I ever knew any of them personally, by the way. None of this is coloured by my recent appearances on those shows. They've just been eternally decent and kind to me. I mean, the night I was about to meet Matt Dillahunty and go on the show, I was extremely nervous because Matt is one of my intellectual heroes. And Shannon, because I had appeared on her show, Shannon was messaging me and you know, giving me confidence, saying, "Oh, you're going to do great, you're going to be okay." Like, she didn't have to do that. She doesn't know me, right? I'm just a stranger. But there was Shannon Q in my DMs, bigging me up, telling me how great I'm going to do and that I have nothing to worry about. And don't be nervous because Matt is a great guy, he's lovely, and he's looking forward to meeting you. And they have just been lovely. The idea that these people might be zealots or anything like that, I just don't buy it. I think the reason that some people might be tempted to believe that these people are zealots is because they've been reading too much Ray Comfort, or because they've been reading articles that were written by the Dauphin who wrote the article we just read. It's in the interest of Christians to present atheists as zealots. It's in their interest to denigrate us from the pulpit or using the written word, because that serves their aim. If they can convince the population, that atheists are zealots, that atheists are stubborn, that atheists are irrational, and that they just hate God, like the God's Not Dead film depicts, the central professor character, played by Kevin Sorbo, is revealed, spoiler alert, at the end of the movie to just simply be, as Dinesh D'Souza might put it, a wounded theist. A theist who just hates God because God took everything from me. Yeah, give me a fucking break. That is the image they want to promote to the public. And they're succeeding in some sense, because this idea that atheists are just people who hate God or hate religious people or who are zealots and so on is more popular in the zeitgeist than I think it has any business being. while you can perhaps find some exceptions. I mean, you're going to find radicals in every movement. There's probably some radical atheist somewhere who's actually just a genuine bigot and would like to see harm even perhaps be visited upon religious people. I don't know. But the world is a strange place at the end of the day. But any of the atheists I know and meet, and the big name atheists on YouTube and stuff, and especially those I've been in communication with, they're all just lovely, decent, kind human beings whose hearts are in the right place. And you know what? Let me extend an olive branch in closing. I would say the same about most theists. Right? Most theists are kind, decent, good human beings as well. We can't emphasize the radicals, the really fundamentalist, horrible evangelical ones, and then paint all theists with the one brush. Most religious people are just going to be normal people like you or I, who are kind, decent, compassionate, and we just have a disagreement. That's it. We have a philosophical or theological disagreement, and that's okay. Let's have the conversation, and that's what my channel's all about. Let's have that conversation. Sure, sometimes I can veer into insult. I'm not perfect. Sometimes I can veer into polemical rhetoric. But whatever the case may be, I'm trying my best, folks, and I'm going to make mistakes along the way. And with an audience like you, I hope to make less of those mistakes, because you guys are never slow about pointing out my errors. And that's one of the reasons I've been able to publish corrections and videos in the past. One of the reasons I've been able to fix things and improve things on the channel by listening to you guys and listening to your feedback. That's the only way I can improve. And we got another super chat here from Raven Lunatic. I really, really appreciate it, Raven. Thank you so much. $10. Let me give you a heart there. I did give a heart to the previous one. I did. Okay. And Raven Lunatic writes, a prayer to the thermos that you allow another Magic Skeptic live stream next week. Got a good feeling about this, guys. Truth be told, Raven, and now I can't make a promise here. But I do plan on doing another live stream this week, actually. Maybe the weekend. I can't promise that, so I don't want to let you down. I'm not saying that's for sure, but if things work out the way I think they're going to work out, I might do another live stream before the end of the week. And so I hope to see you in that one, Raven. But Raven, thank you so much for submitting the super chat. And let's see, maybe the thermos will make your prayer come true there. But that's very, very kind of you to submit that super chat just at the end of the stream here, Raven. That really, really means a lot. But that said, guys, I'm going to leave it right there, because to be perfectly honest, I've been streaming now for coming up in 2.5 hours. I am eternally grateful to you guys from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much for joining me here this evening. I've had an absolute ball. You guys are the best. The fact that people want to sit here and listen to me ramble for 2.5 hours is just completely and utterly humbling. The fact that people want to financially support me on top of that just floors me. And like I said, I'm running out of statements here. I'm just so incredibly flattered and humbled by your support. Thank you so, so much. And with all that said, guys, I will have to leave it right there. And I hope to see you in the next one. All the best. Bye-bye.